Welcome to this YouTube video. Today we have 3 different stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Story 1. The last broadcast of Camp Laurel Run. They drove up into the Great Smoky Mountains the way you pull a blanket over your head. Half for comfort, half for hiding. It was the kind of October that made everything sharper. The ridge lines cut cleanly against the sky. The air in the hollows smelled like wet leaves and the tannin edge of cold water. The last of the katydids sawed away like a radio losing its station. It was a friend's trip, the kind you say you'll do every year and never do again. Marcus, his sister Asha, their college roommate Jun, and Elena, who loved maps enough to fold them wrong so the creases would show where she had actually gone. Camp Laurel Run had a good name and a bad reputation. The ranger at the district office said as much when he slid the permit across the counter without meeting their eyes. "Stay off the south spur past dusk," he said. Not like a warning, but like a reminder to take your pills. Fog sits weird there. People get turned around. Batteries die fast too. When Elena asked why, he gave that courteous mountain shrug that means the explanation is older than the words we have for it. "It's a bowl," he said. "Bowls hold things." They hiked in with the kind of optimism that sounds like gear rattling in new packs. The main trail surprised them by being easy. Soft duff, footbridges, those comforting blazes you could find with your eyes closed. They reached the old ranger bunkhouse by mid-afternoon. A long rectangle of dark wood with the porch slumped like a tired mouth. A faded sign above the door said, "Laurel Run District, EST, 1954, weather band," and someone had drawn a smiley face over the 0. Inside, the dust lay foam thick, and the air tasted like cold pennies. In one corner, a heavy, olive-painted radio console with brass dials, and a plate that read, VHF/UHF, Mutual Aid, WX. Marcus wiped the glass, and the needles showed 1,000 tiny marks, like teeth. "Do not touch," Elena said. Jun smiled. "We're going to touch it." They set camp outside. Tent lines taut, bear canister stashed, the fire ring cleared of last year's glass. A creek gave up its sound in a steady ribbon. A woodpecker administered its sermon. At sunset, a thin fog walked up out of the laurel thickets. Not a wall, but a low congregation, and the woods turned the peculiar kind of quiet that has its own pressure. They ate stove pasta. They told easy, stupid stories about freshman year, about the professor who refused to learn names and called everyone doctor, about the night the fire alarm would not stop, and they sat on the curb while snow put a crown on the fire escape. The fog thickened until it had weight. When it touched their faces, it was warm, like someone's breath. Then a radio came on. Not the big console in the bunkhouse. The sound didn't seem to come from a thing. It arrived like weather, a thin carrier wave that the ear recognizes before the mind can excuse it. Asha set her bowl down. Elena said softly, "That's just..." and then stopped because it wasn't just anything. Static sharpened into the faintest thread of a human voice, the way a child will whisper behind a door to see if you're coming to find them. "Camp Laurel Run, this is the last broadcast." The voice was young, breathy, tired. It seemed to hunt for them without moving. Jun stood, as if to triangulate nothing. "Nice prank," he said, but his good humor did that odd thing it did when he was actually afraid. He smiled too gently. The voice continued, almost apologetic. "If anyone hears this, don't follow the south spur. It doesn't end where the map says. The fog listens. Battery life just drops. Stay above the laurel cut. If you get lost, do not answer if the night says your name." "What station is that?" Marcus asked, and at once hated the question, because if you're asking the woods about programming, the answer has you by the ankle. They slept poorly. At 2:14 a.m., a time that seems to belong to other stories, the voice returned. "Repeat. Last broadcast of Camp Laurel Run. If you see the white blaze with 2 slashes, that's not ours." Dawn was a relief that felt like cheating. They, weirded their way through coffee, and after a long glance at the bunkhouse, they started down trail to see the cataracts the permit had promised. Fog held to the creek line like a rule. The first mile was easy. The second felt longer than a mile should. The third began to slide. The white blazes had always been single bars. Now some wore a second short slash, like a hurried correction. Elena frowned. "Wrong pattern?" she said. "That's not standard." "They repaint," Marcus offered. "Not like that." June tried his phone out of habit. The battery read 84% and then dipped to 41 and then crawled back to 70. "Okay," he said carefully. "That's fun." They reached a fork with a sign that made no sense. A fresh arrow to Camp Laurel Run, pointing left when left was deeper in. The right bend had no sign. On a nearby trunk, a blaze with 2 slashes gleamed like a fresh scar. Asha said, "We turn around." "Dude," June began, and then stopped because the air next to his ear said June. Not loud, but privately, the way an old friend at a party says, "Hey," so only you will hear it. He turned too quickly, and the laurel brushed his jacket in a way that felt deliberate. They went left. Not a group decision, exactly. More like a piece of gravity shifted and their bodies obeyed. The trail narrowed into a cut. The fog went from air to fabric. Behind them, the woods arranged themselves into a different set of trees. The hum of the radio returned, patient. "Camp Laurel Run. This is the last broadcast. If you can hear me, I can almost see you. Don't answer back." The fog repeats what you say and fixes it wrong. "Who are you?" Elena asked before she could help herself. A chorus of Elena's answered from 100 leaves, each a half-second late. "Who are you? Who are you? Are you? You." Then the fog tried Elena a new way, drawing it out like wire, and the trees held very still, listening. They came upon the wreck of a small generator shack, where the map showed nothing. Tin roof buckled inward, a coil of coaxial cable fossilized into the moss. On the inner wall, someone had painted WX-Operations-Keep On in white that had not peeled, though everything else had. Beneath it, a child's scrawl. "If you need the path, sing." Elena traced the letters with a finger and it left no dust. Asha tugged Marcus's sleeve. "You hear that?" she whispered. And he did. Music very far off. Not a song, but the notion of one, as if someone were humming through a sleeve. He thought of their father tuning the kitchen radio by feel, tapping the case when a ball game would not resolve. The symbol of the station had always been an antenna. Now it was a throat made of fog. They turned again, and somehow the creek was on the wrong side. The blazes multiplied. Some were painted where no trail could go, across a slab of rock, high above a washout, into a laurel thicket too dense for bodies. Elena's jaw set in that particular way, and she said, "Somebody's copying the marks." Not accusatory, but like she was naming a weather pattern. Jun said the part out loud that no one wanted phrasal. "I think it wants us on the wrong path." That's when the radio voice changed. "If you're from the group with the blue striped tent, you left your stove on the porch rail." I can see the heat through the fog. I've been up here a long time." "How long?" Asha asked before anyone could stop her. The fog repeated her tone exactly, and then assigned it to a new sentence that no one had said. "How long will you be up here, Asha?" The name sounded like a cough. The voice answered anyway. "Since the tower burned. Since the man with the vest got swallowed in the culvert. Since the weather band said fair and it rained for 3 days from a sky that was dry as bone. Since they told us to keep the broadcast going and we ran out of words, so we started to say the names of the paths instead. If you go quiet, sometimes the path forgets you. Don't go quiet." They stopped talking. Of course they did. Silence crouched in the trail like an animal that is all ribs. Jun broke first. He talked about nothing. The merits of cold soaking oatmeal versus making it taste like anything. The ugly socks he'd bought at the outfitter because they were on the dollar rack. The fog listened, pleased. For a moment, the woods felt like woods again. They reached a place where the laurel leaned so close the leaves brushed their cheeks like hands pretending to be affectionate. Between the branches, the gray became white and then whiter, the way paper can go bright enough to be a blade. The blazes here were fresh and too low, like someone who didn't know the height had guessed at it wrong. Elena took a stick and scratched an X at the base of a tree, and within a minute, another X appeared ahead. Neat and correct, as if the woods had decided to be helpful in a language they were inventing for the first time. "Turn around," she said, urgent now, not pretending it was fine. Right now. They did. The creek sound found them again, as if they'd been missed. Upslope, something gave way with a low, rude slid. Soil letting go, or an animal's soft collapse. The fog leaned, like a person curious at a window. The radio voice threaded through the trees, closer and somehow under their feet. "I tried to leave too," the voice said, "but there's a second trail that isn't painted on wood. It's painted on your breath. When you exhale, it climbs it. I don't think it's mean. I think it is lonely all the way through." "Where are you?" Asha asked, and the fog prepared itself for the shape of her next breath. Down, in the culvert, in the concrete throat that rains talk. Be quick when you cross it. Don't listen to the low echo. It says what will happen to you, but only the part you can't avoid. They reached the culvert exactly when the map said they wouldn't, which is to say where the contour lines shrugged and pretended not to know it. Water ran black and slow through the pipe, throwing back a voice that did not belong to any of them. Elena went first, fast, head down like rain was coming. The echo rose to meet her. "L, nay, Lee, no," catching and grinding her name like a pestle. She stumbled and June caught her, and in that instant the echo took June in its rusted teeth and turned it inside out into Nu, which wasn't a name, but was shaped like an answer to a question you shouldn't ask. Marcus went next. The echo didn't say Marcus. It said, "Hey, kid," in their father's voice. And he froze because the dead have a right to ask you to turn your head. Aisha grabbed his packstrap and hauled him through, and he came up weeping and angry, which sometimes look the same. When they stood again in the cheap light that sun gives to fog, the woods relaxed half an inch. The blazes became normal height again. The creek was on the right side again. A ribbon of wind ran down the hollow and lifted the fog in a single slow sheet, as if a hand were taking off a tablecloth without spoiling the place settings. The radio voice fell to a whisper, then static, then an almost playful hiss. "This is the last broadcast of Camp Laurel Run. Keep the weather band on, even when there's no weather. If you hear your name, don't teach the woods how to say it better. If you leave, leave out loud. Elena said, "Okay." Okay. To the world and to them and to herself. And they began to speak on purpose, naming the rocks and the bridges and the old spruce with the lightning scar. Not brandishing the words, but laying them down in front of them like planks. They reached the bunkhouse by dusk. The porch sagged in the honest way of tired architecture. The big radio in the corner had not moved, but looked like it had been listening to their footsteps for an hour. Asha, who could not help being kind even to machines, sat her hand on the chassis like a blessing. The metal was faintly warm. "Say it," Jun said to the room, without humor. "Say it so it's true." Elena wiped her face with her sleeve, cleared her throat, and spoke into the air and the box and the fog and the mountain, all of which were equal now. "This is the last broadcast of Camp Laurel Run," she said carefully, like reading coordinates. "We are leaving. We are walking the North Trail. We're taking the bridge twice. We won't go quiet." All night, little weather sang. Small breezes that don't belong to anything. The rustle of laurel rehearsing being waves, the white whine of a high bird. When the voice came back at 2:14, it was more tired and more pleased than before. "Good," it said. "Say the leaving as if it's a road. Some of us will hear you." At dawn they shouldered packs that felt used instead of new and set out, naming each turn, past the laurel cut, past the culvert that their mouths refused to make sound around, over the big log that pretended to be a bridge but was a practiced lie, down the last grade where the gravel acted like it had places to be. The parking lot looked improbable, like a toy placed in a diorama by a giant who'd gotten bored. When they started the car battery, the radio in the dash found a weather band signal immediately, a cheerful voice promising mild conditions and a frost advisory at higher elevations. As the tires hit pavement, Elena looked back once and saw fog lying in the creek bed, like a dog that had learned a trick and wanted to be praised. The big forest radio would keep humming to itself until someone else did what they had done. It would make a path out of the air if you let it. It would learn your name if you repeated it. It would fix it wrong. It would keep you if you went quiet. On the highway, they left out loud, named the mile markers, the cut rock that looked like a sleeping face, the catenary swoop of the power lines, each town they would pass that day, each exit and its number. They talked until their throats were clean and sore, and by the time they were too tired to say the road's true name, the mountain was behind them, and the fog had a whole bowl of silence to hold that didn't include them. Some nights, much later, a weather band will pop alive in a kitchen or a garage, and a young voice will say calmly, "This is the last broadcast of Camp Laurel Run." And whoever hears it will think the atmosphere did a neat trick, or a tower bounced off a layer of cold air, or the map got folded wrong and the crease made a door. Some will turn the dial and miss it. Some will listen and understand too much. A few will speak out loud to their empty rooms and say they're leaving like a road, even if they are only going to bed. The woods prefer it when you don't go quiet. Story 2. Elevator to -1. The building at 401 West Beach didn't belong to this century. It had the hunched shoulders of the 1920s and the face of the 1970s. An 8-story brick hospital sheathed in a skin of inert glass. A concrete awning stained the color of old tea. A loading bay big enough for the history of a small city. It had been St. Cordelia's memorial for 6 decades. Births in the East Wing, deaths in the West, everything else stacked neatly between. Then came the new sprawling medical campus out by the interstate, and St. Cordelia's was left alone in the downtown wind to be polite about its retirement. Friends don't vacation to dead hospitals. But Nico wanted an urban exploration weekend in the Midwest, and Yael didn't like telling him no. And Becca collected places that should have been condemned, but were somehow patient. And Dev was the kind of person who would go anywhere with the right flashlight. They parked 2 blocks away and walked in the way people walk when they are pretending to be invisible. Brisk, guilty, wearing smarter shoes than they should. The lobby doors were chained, but generous. Pigeons had learned to keep a schedule. The air inside was medicinal in its bones. Linoleum has a smell the decades cannot unteach. The reception desk still hosted a phone with a cracked handset. The call buttons were red like candy. Someone had spray-painted a heart on the wall and then X'd it out. A map behind plexiglass listed floors and wards and an elevator bank in the central core that would, according to the legend, take you everywhere you had the authority to go. Dev said, "We don't take elevators in dead buildings." Nico said, "We don't take stairs in dead buildings where the fire doors auto-lock." "The fire doors don't," Yael began, and then let it die because the building hummed around them as if some tiny part of it were still plugged in. Becca leaned her forehead on the plexi map like prayer. Her breath made a circle that cleared an inch of dust, and behind it, a label shone that none of them had seen before. Sublevel, -1/archives, tunnels, service. The negative sign looked like something a tired clerk had added in pencil, after the sign came back from the printer missing the important part. "Basement," Dev said. "Nope." "Archives," Becca said. She had a weakness for boxes with cardstock tabbed in the neat handwriting of people who are dead. 5 minutes. Nico pushed on the elevator button like he was ringing a doorbell at a familiar house. No power, obviously. Then the light behind the button gave a small, cheerful blink. They stared at it the way you stare at an animal that has escaped its cage but hasn't noticed yet. Nico grinned because grinning is a way to pull friends forward. "See? Backup generator." "There is no backup generator," Dev said. "There is a spirit of compliance embedded in OSHA signage, and you just woke it up." The elevator arrived with the calm sigh of a thing that has been doing its job a long time and resents your tone. The doors parted. The car inside was brighter than it had any right to be. Hospital green half walls, stainless panel, a floor indicator with its little red glass eye. Someone had scratched C+R 1994 into the molding. The panel showed buttons, L, 1 through 8, and one unlit pancake of black plastic where B sometimes lives. Beneath it, too small to be deliberate, -1 stamped into the metal with a jittering hand, as if someone had hammered the numerals with an office tool at lunch. Yael put her palm against the frame. The metal was cool and faintly alive, like a sleeping pet. She had an urge to apologize to it for reasons she didn't want to explore. "In and out," she said, and felt the word out loosen like a thread. The car rose when Nico pushed the 8, as if refusing their plan out of courtesy. The ascent was smooth. The floors blinked by. The doors opened on 8 to a hallway washed with the ugly brightness of old fluorescents that cannot accept their own death. A gurney slept sideways across the hall like a dog. A helium balloon, miraculously alive and clinically wrong, bumped the ceiling with the exhausted persistence of grief. Its print said it's a boy, and the color had leached out until it looked like a bruise. Somewhere, a television murmured a game with no announcers. "Lights shouldn't work," Dev said. "Have you considered the possibility that we are not in a building but on a stage set made by a god who hates electricians?" Becca said gently, which was her way of being brave. They moved through pediatrics the way you move through a museum of your own life. The wallpaper was a pattern of bears with stethoscopes. The air played back a recording of footsteps that belonged to someone slower, then faster, then not there. In room 807, the blinds were half drawn and the bed had a tidily folded blanket with a hospital's particular brutality. The precise kindness of a corner that knows your body won't want to climb back under it. They didn't stay. Curiosity is one thing. Hospitality is another. There was none here. They returned to the elevator like penitent children and faced the panel. "Basement?" Nico said. "Basement," Yael said. But her voice put on a coat of "not from here" to go along with it. There was no B, only the blank disc, and the little hand-stamped -1 beneath it, like the word for a door they could not name. Dev pressed where a button should be. Nothing. Nico pressed faster, as if the elevator were an old friend who needed energy to remember your face. Becca reached out and laid her finger delicately on the stamped mark, and the car began to descend. No one had pressed anything that time. The floor indicator blinked L and then turned itself off, as if embarrassed. The car kept going down. The hum in the walls changed key, thinner and older, like a string yanked too tight. "Okay," Dev said, and then did not finish the sentence because his throat decided it had other work to do. The doors parted onto a short corridor lit by a single sodium lamp that made everything the color of cheap mustard. A sign said Archives Arrow, and another said Service Arrow, and a third, unhelpfully, said Restricted. The floor was concrete with the shine of old waxes. Somebody had dragged something heavy this way recently. The scuff marks were neat, parallel, and then they simply stopped at the center of the hall. They stepped out because you do. The elevator doors did not close behind them in the rude way of movie elevators. They stayed open, a mouth waiting politely. Becca went right, toward Archives, and the smell of paper rose like heat off a good book. Sliding metal shelves slept in neat ranks. A few stood open, as if the building were mid-thought. Boxes wore labels with the lovely bureaucracy of 1998, rad film, HR, terminations, 1991, school, nurse, program, fall, 85. On a desk, cleaner than the world around it, a binder read, Emergency Operations, Flood. When Becca touched the cover, the binder hummed faintly like a voice coaching itself. She opened to a tab labeled UTILITIES and found a typed line that did not belong to the era of the rest. ELEVATORNEGATIVEONEACCESSAUTHORIZD. Nursing Supervisor. Chief of Service. Anybody who can live with it. Dev, who had a talent for finding bad news in good font, called from the service corridor. "You should see this." They found him at a door with a tiny square of wired glass. On the other side, a hallway whose ceiling was a groin of pipes and whose floor was clean in a way that suggested use, not pride. A map taped to the wall showed a rectangle of tunnels connecting the hospital to the laundry, the boiler house, and a black square with a hand-drawn label. Cart Dock 1. Yael swallowed. Cart Dock? Under the basement? Nico smiled with too many teeth. Secret level. Love that for us. Absolutely do not love that for us. Dev said. Something rolled, far off. The sound drew close, steady as a heartbeat, then passed like a car in fog, right next to them and untouchable. They held still and it went through them, not metaphorically, but in that thin way sound can split you into two people for a second and you come back together wrong. Becca closed the binder and put it back where it had been. She was the kind of person who believes objects have lives and wants to be a good ancestor. "We leave a note for us," she said. "If we come back down here on purpose later, we should know who we were now." They wrote, "Do not press -1 by name. If you need stairs, take them with your mouth. If the elevator asks where, say up. If a nurse without a face gets in, she is going where you can't follow." Dev added a frowning face because no one would think he did. The elevator waited, lights behaving. They stepped in. Yael reached for L. The car did not move. The panel held its breath. Then, like a dog who has learned a trick and is proud, it offered them a new button. -1 bloomed in the dead spot, red behind frosted plastic, warm as a blush. "No," Dev said. Becca said very gently, "If it's going to take us there, it's going to take us there. Better to go because we decided." "We are not deciding," Yael said. Her finger hovered anyway. The little light brightened, pulsed once like a vein. Nico pressed. The car fell. Not physically, but the way your stomach drops when a song hits a note your voice can't. The walls took on a grain that wasn't there before, like wood behind steel. The light dimmed and then decided to be brave. The indicator did not tick past anything. It went quiet and then showed a single, old-fashioned letter that belonged to an elevator in a film. S. The doors opened on a short platform that pretended to be a lobby but had never learned how. Opposite, a second set of elevator doors, not stainless, but painted a tired municipal brown and scarred with the rings of carts that have been told to hurry. Above those doors, in the neat block letters of a sign shop that has done too much work for too many cities, a plaque. -1. Transfer. A small bell rang twice from behind the brown doors. The sound traveled up their spines. The light at the top of those doors, the one that signals a car's arrival, flickered with the politeness of a coughing guest. The elevator arrived, and the doors opened into nothing. No car. A shaft full of cold. One by one, the lights beyond them came on in a row like vertebrae discovering themselves. Far, far below, or maybe immediately in front of them. Depth had stopped behaving. A car waited, turned around. Not an elevator at all, but something like a morgue tray that had learned to go vertically. It had rails for hands to hold. It had a place marked with tape where a body would be. "Going up?" A voice asked, as if from a speaker, as if the building had decided to imitate people to be efficient. The voice was the one you use when you read out numbers on the nightly news, civic, humorless, containing the exact amount of sympathy specified by policy. Transfer to -1 is available. "We're done," Dev said, and hit L hard enough to make the panel flinch. The doors to their car did not close. From the shaft, a smell came like ice and old oranges. The tape on the tray flickered once. The bell rang again, and this time the ring had a little decay at the end, as if it were not mechanically perfect, but a recording of itself worn smooth by use. "Going up," the voice said. And now it was less civic and more curious. "Going up, going up, going up." Yael found the space behind her eyes, where she keeps her backbone. "We are not inventory," she said to the open shaft, and it felt exactly like telling a human person no. She reached into her mouth as if to pull a word out, and when that made no sense, she tried a different thing. She said, "Up," out loud, clearly and firmly, to their elevator, as if asking a dog to heel, as if ordering a pan to stop boiling over. The L button flickered. The doors eased closed. The brown doors across the gap tried to be offended, and then did a small shrug that said, "Very well, there's always later." The car rose, and the relief in that up was not the relief of survival. It was the smaller, truer relief of a choice obeyed. They didn't talk until the doors slid open on the lobby. The chain doors sighed domestic light. Somewhere, a pigeon executed its schedule with admirable discipline. The map behind Plexi still showed -1 stamped in the corner. Their note, which they had taped to the archive desk, did not exist, because of course it was on a floor that was not in the building without being inside it. "Out," Dev said. "Out," Yael agreed. Nico looked at them both like a kid at the base of a roller coaster. "We're coming back." "We're not," Becca said softly, and her softness frightened him more than if she'd shouted. That night, in the motel with the ice machine that made a noise like teeth in a jar, Yael dreamed the elevator doors opened onto her childhood kitchen, and her mother stood there, nodding at the counter, saying, "The transfer cart is here?" And the cart had a bowl of oranges on it. The skins were pale and iced over, glittering like they had grown in a freezer. She swallowed one whole in the dream, and woke with the sour burn of rind rising into her throat. Dev dreamed a button grew in his palm like a scar, and the light behind it kept trying to come on. Becca dreamed nothing and woke weeping and angry, which sometimes looked the same. Nico woke at 3:07, not the witching hour you'd expect, and felt compelled to drive, which is how he knew he would go back without telling them. He left a note he did not intend to send. "I can live with it," quoting the binder as if borrowing the sentence would borrow its bravery. He was seen on a camera downtown at 3:28. Walking with his hands in his pockets like a man who has thought of a good joke he plans to tell to an empty audience. The chain doors to St. Cordelia's were closed exactly as they had been that afternoon. He did not appear on the next camera. When the city inspector came in the morning to check a report of squatting, he found the lobby full of pigeon, the map cloudy with breath circles, the elevator powered down. The inspector wrote, "Power denied," lock car in a neat hand, and underlined it twice. The paper clipped to his ticket fluttered when no one walked by. 2 weeks later, Yael returned with Becca and Dev, and a maintenance key acquired by a cousin who did not ask questions. They found the elevator obediently dead, and the lobby unchanged. In the Plexi map, under the hand-stamped -1, a new note had been added in ballpoint by a lefty. "Going up," the letters were Nico's. Becca put her palm on the glass and said, very quietly, "Not inventory," to the reflection of her own face. Sometimes, in cities that forgot their hospitals, a freight elevator will clear its throat just after midnight and offer a button the building swears it does not have. If you press it by name, you will go where the cart dock waits and a bell rings twice out of compassion and an old recording says, "Repeatedly cheerful going up," meaning you are not ready. You don't know which way that is. The thing about -1 is not that it is down. It is that it is beneath, which is a different direction entirely. The elevator would like you to choose. It will accept up if you say it like you mean it. If you cannot, It will politely escort you to the place where inventory accepts its labels. On weekends, once or twice a year, the power company will report a phantom draw in the block around St. Cordelia's, just enough to light a single small panel and a bell circuit. The engineer on call will make a note that reads, "Lost to ground," and close the ticket because there are more urgent failures in the world. On those nights, a face with all the right features and none of the right expressions will look out from the elevator's stainless steel and adjust an invisible cuff and point with one finger in the precise, tired way of a person who has been told to keep a schedule. If you see him in the reflection, and you will if you look, step back. Say up to yourself like a password, and the building will remember the part of its job where it keeps you. Say it twice even. Up, up. Watch the button glow like an orange from the freezer. Watch the door decide that closing is a virtue. Watch the car remember the floors that are fit for humans. Treat the maps kindly. Don't learn the new button by heart. That is a kind of inventory you cannot live with. Story 3. Keepers of Whitlow Point. Whitlow Point sits on a knife of Maine granite where fog moves like a religion. The coastline there is a minor apocalypse of rock. Black shelves, tidal pools dark enough to be windows, junipers shaped into humility by wind. A lighthouse that looks like the idea of a lighthouse. White, clean, ornery, made of stubbornness. No one goes by accident. The road gives up at a chain across a gravel apron that looks like it could remember horses. Beyond that, a footpath that understands boots and takes no interest in sneakers. Kara inherited the leasehold in a way that felt like a dare. Her great-uncle had kept Whitlow's light for 33 years without falling off anything or losing a hand or turning mythic in the ways keepers sometimes do. He left her a box of logs, a brass key, and a single note. Keep the foghorn fed. Keep the lantern full. Keep the door shut after midnight. Don't answer if the rock knocks. The lawyer said, "It comes with a stipend." The Coast Guard automated the beacon. But some places don't stay automated. They like hands. She took the post for reasons that made no sense in the apartment and perfect sense on the point. She was tired of sound you don't get to choose. She was tired of wanting and being wanted in the way a city wants you. She was tired of waking to a window that looked at another window. Whitlow Point promised an honest form of loneliness. The generator shed shook like a dog when the diesel caught. The light inside the lantern room turned patiently, a slow blink that told small boats a true story. The foghorn sat like a beast too proud to beg, and when the barometer fell, it opened its throat and said "I" in a voice that made your ribs reconsider their spacing. Her first night, she kept count without meaning to. The horn called, I pause, on a cycle old as whatever deals the sea has made with the edge of the land. Rain brushed the roof like hands learning piano. The keeper's log waited on the desk with a pencil that had been sharpened too often and was now mostly stubbornness. She wrote the date, the weather, the pressure. 2 ships sighted. The way the horn vibrated the teacup. When midnight came, she closed the door because the note had asked her to. She did not know what it would mean for rock to knock, and she did not intend to teach it. At 2:03 a.m., someone knocked. It wasn't a fist on wood. It was stone on stone, 3 measured taps, just off center, like a person who doesn't want to do it, but must. Kara remembered the note like a cold on her scalp. She didn't move. The horn said "I," and the sea answered in its billion dialects of shiver. The knock came again, 3 taps, as if the rock had a throat it used for courtesy. Something small crawled in the wall. The generator hiccuped. The third knock lived in the glass of the lantern room and then was gone. In the morning, she walked the headland with a thermos in her pocket as if it were a hand. Fog lay flat, a sheet, an obedient dog. But out beyond the bell buoy, a seam opened. A long figure leaning along the surface, a slick arc that the book would have called sunfish, and the old women in town would have called the whitlow, meaning anything that surfaces when a keeper is new. She raised the thermos like a toast, and the sea showed nothing that could be killed or named. That seemed fair. She adjusted to the schedule. Keepers live by cycles. Cycles teach keepers to live. Fuel, wick, glass, horn. The light did its perfect job when the generator did its imperfect one. She learned the stubborn corner of the crystal where salt insisted on growing even though the window was tight. When fog built noon into false night, fishermen idled just outside the reef and watched the blink with the eyes of anyone making a bargain. Sometimes a radio call came thin and civil. "Whitlow, your horn strong, good afternoon, keeping you honest." And she said, "Afternoon, Terry," or "Afternoon, Anonymous," and fed the horn another minute of diesel. On the seventh night, the rock knocked again. 3 taps. She did not answer, just as the note had asked. But she did slide her chair an inch so that her knee pressed the door's lower panel, like a person who has put her weight on a promise to see if it will hold. Fog came with a different posture, the kind that hunches on the water like a thing ashamed of having a face. The horn said aye, and a second horn answered from the south, faint with distance, badly timed. She checked the radio. The channel was polite static. The generator adjusted its own opinion and settled into a satiated murmur. At 2:03 the knock came and then kept coming. 3 taps, 3 taps, 3 taps, patient and insistent, the way someone will say your name to wake you when you have asked to be woken, but now you're not grateful. Kara stood because her legs needed something to do besides tremble. "We're closed," she said to the door in a voice she used once on a man at a club who did not understand what no is made of. The knocking stopped. Relief isn't a story, but hers felt like one. She slept an hour before dawn and dreamed of buttons that said on and on and on and nothing else. The town learned she was there and decided how to like her. The grocer bagged her butter like a secret. The woman at the post office asked if she needed a better raincoat and then whispered the name of a Catalina fishmonger's use for courage. The bar kept a stool clean for her in the corner with a view of the marine forecast. No one asked about her life before Whitlow, because people who belong to weather owe different debts than those who belong to schedules. "Do you hear it?" A man at the elbow of the bar asked one Thursday when the wind had to be peeled off the door. "The rock. It knocks." "I don't answer," she said, not looking up from her chowder. "Good," he said, with a relief that felt old. "That's how you keep the place. It's not a rule. It's a bargain." "What happens if you do?" she asked, absurdly cheerful. The chowder had been very good. "You keep it again," he said. "Longer?" She did not ask what longer meant because the sea was already saying it in a handful of voices against the quay. On day 19, a storm came with its coat off. The marine band said, "Gale warning," in a tone that made the words sound like a polite invitation to destruction. The horn did its old, simple job. The light turned and turned in the patient way people have when they are being watched. At 2:03 the knock came, and Kara did not open, did not stand, did not speak. At 2:04, she heard footsteps on the iron stair. Metal has a way of telling you the weight of what walks it. These steps were not human. They were something like a person, and something like water, and something like stone. A combination of pressures that learned how to behave politely on treads. They stopped outside the lantern room door, and then, with starched manners, tried the handle. The door did not open. The keeper had shut it after midnight. The bargain was intact. A voice spoke that was not a voice, but the exact shape of one. A pressure in the cartilage at the base of the ear. The curl of consonant that fog can do when it is bored. The vowel in I that the horn had been making for a century. "Keeper," it said conversationally, and the word turned her stomach to salt. "Keep me." She thought of the note in the box, of the pencil stub, of the line her uncle had written in 1979, where the horn had failed for 2 minutes during a thunder event. And he had written, "I sang." She did not sing. She did what a person does when sea and machine and weather ask things you cannot change. She worked. She checked pressure. She fed diesel. She turned the lens by hand for 30 seconds, for no reason other than to flex the muscle of doing. She named what worked out loud. Foghorn operational. Lantern lit, door shut, knock not answered. She wrote the same in the log, in the careful block of a person making a prayer without permission. The steps receded. The storm made itself bigger to be offended, and then wore itself out like the best people do. At dawn, the horn rested its voice against the hull of the day and asked for nothing. Kara slept with her boots on because she had learned how to. There are keepers whose work is not paid in money or pride, or even the slight fame of a lighthouse on a postage stamp. There are keepers who keep because the place will become something else if you don't. Worse for boats, worse for people, worse for stories. Whitlow Point was a patient employer. It rewarded her with days where the horizon had edges that could cut fruit. It punished her by making her miss voices she'd lived with for a decade, until the ache organized her into someone better. It asked for bargains around 2:03 a.m. and accepted answers given with the exact right number of words. None. On the 33rd night, the knock came not at the door, but at the window of the lantern room. 3 measured taps against glass, too thick for any sensible thing to choose. The lantern light passed through fog and returned with a person in it. Just the suggestion of someone waiting on the rail, not male or female or old or young, a silhouette made of density different than the rest. The foghorn said "I," and the person did not flinch. Kara stood with her hands on the rail. "We're closed," she said, not apologizing. "Open," the fog person said, and the word made a dent in the air. It turned its head in a gesture you see on docks when men decide who will throw the line. It had the posture of someone who doesn't mean to be unkind, but cannot help the work they do. Behind it, for the first time, she saw other lights out beyond the reef. Small, private bosses of flame, not boats. They rose and fell without moving. She had the sense of other lighthouses under the water, each with its own tired human inside. "I'm keeping it," she said. "You will keep it again," the person promised, not threatening, not kind. When the horn stops being fed, when the generator spills its last, when the light turns without you and you get lonely and you think a knock at the door is a thing you deserve. I will come and we will open, and you will keep it again for longer. The fog pressed a hand against the glass, and the glass pressed nothing back because it was built not to do that. "Not tonight," Kara said. And she said it lightly and correctly, the way you tell a child no with cake cooling on the counter, so they will be delighted later. The person in the fog bowed, not ironically, not theatrically, as if a bargain had been named and its edges matched. It stepped off the rail without moving, and the fog accepted its weight like a signature. Kara did not write any of that in the log, because the log was for weather and ship names and the truth of fog. She drew a dot in the margin where 203 lived, and in pencil soft enough to erase, wrote Keeper came. A month later, the generator threw a fit that no amount of wrench could soothe. The Coast Guard sent a man with a gentle voice and oil under his nails, and he said, he always coaxed it with his hands, meaning her uncle, meaning keepers keep engines by different rules than contracts can require. The man returned the next day with a part and a thermos, and a story about sleeping under a desk in a hurricane that was really about learning your limits. He did not ask about knocks. He did not need to. His eyes knew time. Storms come. Fog belongs to itself. The horn wants its word. Nights beyond midnight still hold rooms no one has a number for. Kara learned a discipline she had not thought to want, the talent for refusing out of love. She refused her loneliness at 203. She refused the glamour of myth when fishermen told stories at the bar about the keeper who married the sea. She refused the way anxiety tries to knock in the daytime, by counting breaths until the count belonged to the light instead. On a winter morning so clean you could salt food on the horizon, a man washed up on Whitlow Point with his eyes open and his hands clenched as if he were still holding the thing he had brought to shore. He was alive, which the ocean sometimes forgets to deliver. Kara pulled him in with the competence a person grows when machines and weather require not emotion, but action. He coughed out a river's worth of grief and then a few words. The light, he said, shaking, though the sun had chosen the world for itself. The light was beneath us. She wrapped him in wool the color of men who worked hard and called the Coast Guard and fed the horn and marked the place in the log with a small cross. That night, the knock went unmade. Even the fog understands certain forms of victory. Years in, Whitlow Point knew her the way a chair comes to know the person who reads in it. It takes your shape. You take its. When they offered to automate again, to run the beacon on a quieter diesel and accept a monthly visit from a man with a tablet, she said she would finish the term on the lease, and then they could ask her again. The man on the phone used a tone you use on people who keep things you can't measure. "We appreciate your service," he said. And he meant it without understanding. On her last official night, the fog was thin enough to pretend to be weather instead of personality. She fed the horn an extra 5 minutes because it pleased her. At 2:03, the knock came, unhurried, inevitable. The sound of long bargains arriving for inspection. She stood with her hand on the door and smiled. "We're closed," she said, with gratitude and malice and joy, because saying it had saved her life. The person in the fog put its head against the glass and sighed with professional disappointment. "Tomorrow," it said, not a threat, an excellent scheduling skill. "I'm staying," Kara said, surprising herself as she said it. They can bring tablets. They can bring policies. They can bring replacement keepers with instruction videos. I'm staying. I'll keep it till it doesn't want me. Outside, something smiled, which is not a gesture fog should make, and yet it wore it well. The horn said I, as if it had heard the part of the conversation that mattered. The light turned and turned, because it had always intended to do that. When she finally sleeps in another bed in a city with elevators and trash day and neighbors who argue about recycling bins, She will sometimes wake at 2:03 to a knock that is only the refrigerator settling or the building acknowledging temperature. She will smile and refuse and fall back to sleep. If she forgets once and answers out of habit, she will hear nothing on the other side of the door, because Whitlow Point only keeps the bargains you keep with it. If she returns to visit in a year or 10, some night when the fog is honest and the wind curls its finger, she may knock 3 times against the rail like a person pretending to be rock. The person in the fog will answer with a politeness expensive enough to be called love. "Keeper," it will say, and the word will taste like salt. She will not open. That's how you keep a place. If you go to Whitlow Point, you won't see her. Keepers are like weather, present, busy, disinclined to satisfy visitors. You'll hear the horn say "I" in a voice that teaches bones when to flex. You'll see the light behave correctly. You'll watch fog do impressions of people you miss. If midnight finds you on the gravel apron, listening for something proof-shaped, you will hear a knock that belongs to rock and a door that belongs to a person who knows the difference between yes and no. Go home. Keep your bargains. Let the lighthouse keep hers. The sea keeps everything eventually. The trick is to teach it how to keep you without needing to take you. The trick is to say no like a beacon, regularly, patiently, from a height, with fuel. The trick is not a trick. It's work. That's why it's scary. That's why it saves you.